providers and practices to educate them about the Medicaid incentive payment program, and also conducting webinars like these for education purposes. So I thank you in advance for your attention today, and I would like to turn it over to my colleague, Al Robleski.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome to this webinar on registration attestation. As Stephen pointed out, please enter all your questions. We'll handle them at the end rather than during the presentation to make sure we get through it, and for those who are not at all familiar with the process, that they'll get sort of the complete picture. Stephen, will that be posted on the website afterwards?
Yes, it will be.
And are we sending out the PDF to the participants as well?
Correct, after the meeting.
Great. So you'll have an access to it afterwards, so if there's anything that you'd like to look at in greater detail, you will have access afterwards. So let's get started. Registration and attestation, the process begins at the federal level, and I'll try to be responsible and identify all these initialisms for those of you who are not familiar. And I just realized I missed one already. EHR is electronic health record, and that's become the shorthand term for the technology that is now being used to replace paper, and more specifically, if it's a certified version, which is then known as a CEHRT or CERT, that means it's been certified by the Office of the National Coordinator for Health Information Technology, and means that the provider using the system will be able to achieve meaningful use. So the purpose of our webinar today is really not to go into meaningful use or the intricacies of the EHR systems, but really how do you begin entering into the process. If this program is something that you qualify for, what are the specific steps that move you through the registration and attestation process? Okay, so we now know what EHR is. Distinguish between the roles of EPs. EPs are eligible professionals, and that's the term used by CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, that identifies those who are eligible to participate in this program. So EPs, when you see that, that means an eligible professional. Another aspect of the program is for hospitals, and that term is EH, eligible hospitals. The program today is focused on eligible professionals. One of the things we'll be talking about are designees and primary users. What's the difference? We're going to be talking about the basic functions of the following systems: NPPES, which is the National Plan and Provider Enumeration System, the CMS I&A Management System. I&A is Identity and Access. The PACOS, which is the Provider Enrollment Chain and Ownership System. And then the CMS RNA System. RNA is Registration and Attestation System. We'll be looking at the key steps required to successfully register at the CMS level, and we'll answer some questions, look at some of the issues that do come up in terms of gaining access either at the CMS or the Massachusetts state level. We'll also be looking at the difference between the systems, the CMS federal level and then the Massachusetts Medicaid systems, interrelationship between the three systems: CMS, RNA system, again, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, Registration and Attestation System. MMIS is the Medicaid Management Information System, and MAPR is the specific application program where you actually fill in the details of the certified technology you're using, and in stages 1, 2, and 3, meaningful use measures. MAPR stands for the Medical Assistance Provider Incentive Repository. Here's a schematic showing the 3 specific systems that you'll be working through. The one to the left, the CMS, Identity and Access, and Registration Attestation System. So the CMS, that's at the federal level. The blue box in the middle is where you begin at the state level. One of the things about the registration at the federal level with Medicaid is you specify what state you're going to be attesting for. So depending on which button you hit, you'll end up in Massachusetts, or if you hit Arkansas, you'll end up in Arkansas, which probably won't help you a whole lot. Once you're in the state system, the blue box, which is essentially a pass-through, a brief visit, you end up on the screen at the right, Mapper, which is where all the details are entered in and the actual application is completed. Today's webinar is going to focus on the first two boxes at the CMS level and then entering into the state system, the Provider Online Service Center. We really won't get into the Mapper except to introduce you to it and to indicate how you access it. One of the things I want to explain, which sometimes can be confusing, if you look at the box on the left, CMS, Registration and Attestation System, for the purposes of the Medicaid program, you're really not attesting at that point. The attestation system is for the purposes of Medicare. If you happen to be going through the Medicare program, you would be attesting at the CMS level. So we're really talking about registration. That's the purpose of the CMS level for the Medicaid program. Attestation, which is where you're attesting to meeting the measures, qualifying in terms of patient volume threshold and so forth, happens in that very last box, the Mapper application system. So keep that in mind. I apologize for that being a little bit confusing. But at the CMS level, we're really talking about registration. The attestation doesn't happen at the federal level. It happens at the state level. So how does that process play out? Okay, NPI, we're all familiar with that, the National Provider Identifier, which every provider has, and that's to be found on the National Plan and Provider Enumeration System website. So that's a key aspect of registration, having an active NPI. Our people are very good at assisting you if you have difficulties with that or there's something that doesn't align. Much of the registration process is really about alignment of numbers and names. For example, if a person is moved and the address is incorrect, they've gotten married, the name has changed, all of those details of numbers and names will pop up and in a way prevent you from moving forward with the application. You may think this is excessively tedious. On the plus side, there is a great deal of due diligence in terms of making sure that you are the person you claim to be and that in fact this program is going to provide the incentive payment to the correct person. So from a due diligence point of view, this is a very, very important piece. And our staff is very committed to helping you navigate this process and work through any problems or glitches you may encounter. So what this slide is basically telling us about is some of the issues you're going to be looking at navigating to the CMS INA system to create an account. Now the INA, when we use that term, Identity and Access, is really about creating a designee. The eligible professional has to authorize an individual to represent them through this process, and that's what the INA system is all about, is identity and access. You're identifying the designee and giving them permission to access the system on behalf of an eligible professional. Keep in mind this program is an individual program, so that means each and every eligible professional must complete an application separately. It's not done by a practice. It's not like a practice or a clinic level. It's done each one individually. And this is why this is a very, very important step to make sure all the numbers match up, the names match up, and that you're basically granted access to move forward with the application. So the term we use for those who are not eligible professionals but are in fact completing the application for somebody else, they could be an eligible professional. In other words, you can be a designee, you can be an eligible professional and be a designee for others as well. But the term designee, think of it as that's the person who's actually completing the application. So it's very, very important, first of all, that in terms of the selection of the designee, that the person really understands what's involved, and they'll be working through the entire process. It's very important that the designee gets support from the institution, the practice, and the providers, so that as they are gathering information and they need signatures or whatever, people understand the importance of being prompt with getting back to the requirements the designee is asking you to complete. So it's not because the designee wants to make life miserable or tough for you. It's that there's a great deal of attention paid to the details of getting things right. Identity and access. Remember, identity and access is about the designee. So the first step is the user account is required to be associated with the NPI of the EP. So again, the National Provider Identifier has to be associated with the eligible professional. Seems totally obvious. It is obvious, but sometimes there's a disconnect. It's not connected up for one reason or another. So that's very, very important that the correct NPI is associated with the eligible professionals. If there is a group practice, obviously all the NPIs of all the eligible professionals have to be gone through one at a time to make sure that they, in fact, all match up. The eligible professional must authorize the designee and approve access. That's a really critical point, and sometimes people don't do that, and the application process just sort of sits there waiting for this approval. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. If this person is going to be acting on your behalf, so it's a very, very important step that authorization occur to give the designee the ability to move forward with the application. Beginning the registration. Again, remember that we're talking at this level about registration, not attestation. Attestation comes later when you've already gone through the state and you're dealing with the MAPR system. PACOS, which is the program at the CMS level, which allows any provider to enroll or register with CMS, including the EPs who accept Medicaid patients. So PACOS is a much broader system which serves a number of needs at the CMS level. The second step is registering the EPs into the PACOS system. Designees enter them into the RNA system. Again, it's a matter of just following the instructions, name, address, phone number, incentive type, payment information. And again, this is step-by-step. The instructions, at least as we've encountered them with people who have gone through the process, is pretty straightforward. But again, anytime you run into something where you're puzzled or not knowing what to do, please feel free to call our staff. We'll help you through. Another aspect of identifying whether or not the eligible professional is the right person is connecting with various tax identifiers, either the tax identification number, the employer identification number, social security number. So it sort of depends in terms of the particular structure that the eligible professional is working in terms of which of these numbers applies. Again, it's very important that the correct numbers be used. This can get complicated. We have a number of groups operating with under, one umbrella. And again, I just encourage you to call our staff if there are questions or if you're not sure how to enter the numbers, what's the correct way to go about it. We'll help you sort that out. So this is again more of the details going through the system. Payee information. We're looking at, again, this is at the federal level, verifying and submitting the registration. So by the time you get to this, you're just about done. You've identified all the different aspects of the tax identification number, NPIs, the numbers associated with the Massachusetts Mass Health Provider Identifier. If all of these numbers match up, everything's good to go. Then you move on to the next level, which is the state system. So at this point, you've basically moved through, again, at the top it says registering in the CMS RNA system. And again, remember what we're talking about is registering. So you haven't attested to anything. You're basically getting the good housekeeping seal of approval that all your numbers match up, and you're good to go on to the next level. You will indicate which state you're interested in applying to, and again, Massachusetts is the right answer to that question. And once you hit that button, you'll be moving on to the state system. So I'd like to turn the webinar over to my colleague, Liz Frenchkowski, who will guide us through the state system. Liz?
Thank you, Al. So at this point, we're going to walk through the state systems that integrate with the CMS RNA registration and attestation system. Basically, as Al said, successful completion of the CMS RNA process will enable access to these state systems. So again, we're kind of talking primarily here about access. So if you successfully complete the CMS INA, which is identity and access, and CMS RNA, which is registration and attestation system, if you successfully complete those processes, you would be granted access to the state systems, which include the POSC, which is the Provider Online Service Center, the new MMIS, which is the Massachusetts Medicaid Information System, and what we affectionately here call MAPR, which is the Medicaid Assistance Provider Incentive Repository. MAPR is where you would actually complete your attestation and application for the EHR incentive payment. So it gets into the details of patient volume threshold calculation, your general requirements for meaningful use, and your meaningful use menu and core measures if you've reached that point in the program. So MAP is where you'd actually complete the step-by-step application for the Medicaid EHR incentive payment. Once the EP, eligible professional, or their designee completes the CMS registration process, a notification is sent to the new MMIS system to determine if the provider has an existing provider profile within the state system. Assuming that that's a yes, then you would receive what we affectionately call our Welcome to MAPR email, allowing you access to the MAPR system and the MAPR application. If for some reason the answer to that question is no and the provider does not have an existing provider profile within the state system, that would require a special enrollment, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the webinar. But right now we're going to assume all the lights are green and that everything's a go, and that the provider has an existing provider profile. So when they receive that Welcome to MAPR email, the provider or the designee would click the link within the email, and it would bring them to this screen. And then if you can see sort of tiny there on the left-hand side of the screenshot that's visible there, at the very bottom of the left-hand menu, it says EHR Incentive Program. Clicking that link would bring the EP or their designee to a login screen so that you can log into MAPR and complete your EHR Incentive Payment Program application via the virtual gateway. This gives you an idea of what it looks like if you are successfully able to get to that login screen and submit your username and password. At the bottom there is a screenshot of what you would see if you were not authorized to access that system. And if you're not recognized by the system as an authorized user. So if you are unfortunate enough to see that screen, these are the steps that you would take to sort of rectify that situation and get recognized as an authorized user within the system. You may need to complete a Massachusetts, a Mass Health Data Collection Form, or DCF. So again, the DCF stands for Data Collection Form. And it's a form used by Mass Health for multiple purposes, but for the purposes of the Medicaid EHR incentive program, it's, again, a way to become recognized as an authorized user within the state system. The other step that you may need to complete here is to identify the primary user within your organization. So the primary user can be the same as the designee, but is not necessarily the same as the designee, and in many organizations is not. The primary user is someone who is a virtual gateway or a systems administrator who may have prior access to the virtual gateway for multiple reasons. There may be multiple functions that they're performing with regard to Mass Health, so they have access. They may have previous access to the virtual gateway. So if you have a primary user in place, they can manage subordinate accounts, they can add and subtract users, and they also can grant users the access they need, security role, to enable them to attest on the provider's behalf. So if, for instance, you encounter the screen on the bottom there and you're not authorized to use the service, you may need to contact your primary user within your organization, and they can grant you the necessary access privileges to log on to the Mass Medicaid system. So again, the primary user is sort of the manager of this whole virtual gateway account, and they can grant access to other users, again, assign the security role to the designee for the purposes of applying for the Medicaid EHR incentives. And if you don't have one, you have to create one. If you have one and you know who it is, that person can assign you access. If you're unaware of who your primary user might be, or you're not sure if you have one, you can contact the Mass Health customer service number, which is at the bottom of the screen there, which is not to be confused with our customer service number. Our team is happy to help you, delighted to help you in any way that we can, but when it comes to access to the virtual gateway and the Mass Health system, you really need to go through the Mass Health customer service team to address any issues that you may be having with that. The fourth step, as it's outlined here, is if the eligible professional or designee does not have a primary user linked to them in the Provider Online Service Center, or if the existing primary user is no longer with the organization, then the eligible professional or designee would need to complete a data collection form and return that to us. And the data collection form, again, is used for multiple purposes for Mass Health. So it does have instructions on there on how to fax it or return it to the Mass Health processing office. However, we request that you send it here to us first for processing here, and then we will forward it along to Mass Health on your behalf. And the reason behind that is we really want to know when it's complete, if it's completed correctly. If it's not completed correctly, then we will contact you and address any discrepancies that we're finding. And we really want to have some time to process it here on our end and make sure we have everything lined up here and have all of our ducks in a row before the DCF gets forwarded along to Mass Health for their processing purposes. So we do ask that you return it here, either by fax or email, or you can send it via the good old-fashioned U.S. mail. And once your data collection form is approved, the eligible professional or their designee would be granted access to the systems necessary to participate in the program and apply for the EHR incentive. The fifth step, which is a beautiful thing, is when you finally get to this screen and it says you have access to Mapper. Again, Mapper is the system where you'd actually complete your EHR incentive payment application, put in all of your patient volume threshold calculating numbers, all of your meaningful use core and menu measure numbers if you're at that point in the program and you're testing for meaningful use. And MAPR's pretty good about effectively guiding you through the EHR incentive payment application process. So MAPR basically takes you step by step and then asks you for, your patient volume threshold numerator, your patient volume threshold denominator. It's really going to walk you through step by step. If you should encounter any problems with MAPR or any questions about MAPR, please feel free to contact our provider enrollment team at the number below. As Al mentioned and as I've mentioned, we're happy to support you and answer any questions and guide you through the process in any way that we can. We're happy to help. So this section goes into the special enrollment process that I mentioned earlier. This is, it's important to keep in mind that this is for providers. So everything we've been talking about up until this point can be either for the provider or their designee. It's about gaining access to the systems that you need access to in order to complete your application. This process is really provider specific. So it's a provider who has no MassHealth provider ID, for instance, a nurse practitioner or a resident who does not bill MassHealth directly and therefore has no MassHealth provider ID number and isn't recognized within the MassHealth system as a provider. If that's the case, then the provider or their designee would be required to complete a special enrollment packet. This is emailed out to you, and it's composed of the cover letter, the request for a license or license number, the EHR provider agreement, a W-9 and EFT, as well as the data collection form that we mentioned earlier. And the email would contain instructions on how to complete each of the required documents. And then we require that you mail those back to us because many of the documents there require a original wet signature for the purposes of MassHealth. So we really need the originals of the documents mailed back to us through, again, the good old-fashioned U.S. Postal Service. So in terms of expediting the special enrollment process and kind of getting through it as quickly as we can, we do request that the eligible professional or their designee complete and return all the forms to us within 7 business days. And again, we need the originals of the forms mailed back to us. The special enrollment forms are reviewed and processed within 14 business days unless there are discrepancies, which can result in a delay, unfortunately. And when everything's successfully completed and filed and processed, then the EP or their designee would receive that beautiful Welcome to MAPR email with instructions on how to log into the Provider Online Service Center and MMIS and go ahead and complete their attestation. This is just a list of some helpful links that you may find useful and beneficial when you're walking through this process. Particularly the last one there, the Provider Online Service Center. Again, any issues with access to that would have to be directed to the MassHealth customer service line and not necessarily here because they're really the ones that can help you with access issues there. Just some contact information for myself and Al. Should you wish to contact us and set up a site visit or discuss any questions or concerns that you have, we're always here and happy to talk with you. And now I think we are going to take some questions. Stephen?
So if you have a question at this time, please use the raise your hand function, and we can unmute you so that you can ask the presenters your question. We have a question. Paul, you are unmuted. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks, Al. Thanks for the presentation. I have a question about the virtual gateway. I'm not really sure how it fits into the picture. My understanding is first you register yourself, or a designee registers a provider at the federal level on the CMS website, and then the second step is the mapper. So how does virtual gateway and the provider enrollment website come into the picture?
So the virtual gateway is sort of the system that's used to access the mapper application. So you could think of it as a conduit or sort of an on-ramp to the highway that gets you into the mapper application. So you have to have a profile within the Provider Online Service Center in order to access mapper. Kelsey, does that sound about right? Definitely.
So Paul, what it is, basically, if you think of it, we're going from the federal level to the state level. That's the Mass Health port of entry, basically. So you're going from CMS to Mass Health, and you pass through customs, so to speak, and then you're on to the mapper application. So it's a brief visit, basically. Not much happens there, but basically you have to be identifiable through the Mass Health system, and then you go immediately into the mapper application.
Great, thank you. Can I ask a quick follow-up if there's?
Absolutely.
Thank you. So how do providers? So in the NPP at the federal level, if you have an NPI, the chances are good that you have an account in NPPES, right? How's that with virtual gateway? Will providers have an account previously, or how does that get set up? So if I'm understanding this right, they finish the federal level registration, and that information is transmitted to the state level, and if everything checks out at the federal level, that information goes into virtual gateway, but it only matches up if you have a pre-existing account in virtual gateway.
We're going to have Kelsey handle that one because she works every day on these specific issues. Kelsey?
So, correct. So once you complete the registration for the CMS portion of it, the information that you enter basically is sent over to the state system, and it's matched up against what Mass Health has on file for the provider. So it's checking against the provider's name, their provider type, their NPI, their social security number, and if all of those data elements match up, you receive that welcome to mapper email saying everything is checked out and you can go into the application to complete it. But if something isn't right, either if the provider is not enrolled with Medicaid currently, which is actually really common if you work at an FQHC or a community health center, they typically don't bill under the provider's credentials. They bill under the group as a whole. So those providers usually aren't enrolled with Medicaid, so they'll need to complete the special enrollment. Also, too, another issue that we've come across is if someone's social security number is entered incorrectly into Mass Health system, if somebody inadvertently enters the social in the incorrect order, that also will prevent somebody from being able to get into the application, because when the system tries to find a match, it's not matching, so it kind of spits it out, and we then will research it and contact you and let you know what documentation is needed for Mass Health to update the information.
Great,
so I'm
thank
not sure if that answered your question.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. And Paul, I think maybe another part of your question was that, you know, if you don't have access or don't have a login username and password for the virtual gateway, that can be a stumbling block as well, and it can be. So if there's not a primary user within your organization that has access to the virtual gateway and has a login name and password, then you need to set one up, and that would be through the data collection form that we talked about. We would send that out to you, and you could complete that and send it back, and then we would set up a primary user account for you.
Yes, and that form also is included in the special enrollment document. So if someone is not in Mass Health System, the data collection form is part of the special enrollment. So when they do get enrolled with Medicaid, they're also going to be defining who the authorized official is.
All right. We have another question. This is from Candace Bumpus. Candace, you're off mute. Ask your question to the presenters.
Candace?
All right, we'll come back to Candace. Up next is Joan Leonard. Joan, go ahead and ask your questions to the presenters. Joan, are you there? All right, we'll keep moving on.
Maybe you could have people type it in.
I have to. So. Got one more question from Kristen Smith. Kristen, you're off mute. You can ask your questions to the presenters.
Kristen?
All right, guys. It seems that we have no other questions. If you have a question after the webinar goes offline, just be sure to send it to either Al or Liz. As a reminder, this presentation will be sent out to everyone by email and will be posted on our website. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much for attending, and again, contact us if you have any questions. And again, the number you want to remember there is the 855 MASS EHR, where our support people will help you through every step of the process.
Thanks very much.